Monday, November 3rd, 4:45 p.m. In the meeting room at the Eatonville branch of the Pierce County Library. Don't worry about that, Izzy. That's just a personal thing that I do because I like to keep track of the videos I take. Yeah, basically this is the video for you to figure out the flow so you can make the slides for the assignment. Just some basic stuff if you don't mind. I'm just going to do one take and go straight through, and I'm kind of going to be jumping in and out of the presentation as we go because I don't want to sit here for forever and I only have the meeting room for so long. Another thing, I'm going to snap. I really hope you can hear that. If not, at least you can see it. And that's going to be generally when I think it would be beneficial to have either an animation in a slide to bring up new information or straight up a move to a new slide. Feel free to change that if you want, your formatting person, but that'll be my suggestions. So one take, first go around. I might be having to redo some things, so I'll let you know as that happens. And then this is switching slides right there. Slide switch. More information. Slide switch. Anyway, you get the picture. Okay. Starting off with the intro and then kind of getting into it. Hey everybody, I'm Grant, as you know, and I was put in charge of the popular news article. And that was Let Slip the Dogs of War Let Slip the Robot Dogs of War is the source that I ended up going with. It's by a guy named Jared Keller, published on Wired, and it generally discusses the development of weaponized and autonomous walkers, or really can be applied to autonomous combat elements in any situation. So the main argument of the article is that combat-capable walkers, or in general other automated and independent combat elements, are inevitable, independent of the ethical concerns. And then kind of the subtext there is that we shouldn't really have to worry, or we don't need to worry about the ethical issues of this because it's going to happen anyway. So might as well beat them to it, As far as how this relates to our question, by kind of highlighting the inevitability of the advancement of these automated or independent combat elements, it tries to claim the futility of the ethical debate in question. So that's that subtext that I just mentioned earlier. So let's get right into it with proper support. Does the author effectively support the argument, and why are we not? Personally, yes. Technically, I think that the source was properly supported. Asterisk. I said technically because it uses almost entirely what I like to call borrowed reasoning, making it nearly impossible to refute. Because of this, their evidence, it kind of seems impervious to all criticism coming its way, because I can just kind of deflect it on, well, that's what he said, which on paper means it should be an ironclad defense. Nothing you can do against it works. So technically that means yes, the claim was thoroughly supported, because nothing that you can attack it with on its own level really does anything. Unfortunately, given the underlying structure of how this article is constructed, I do not see that the fundamental claim is true because of the unstable base. To give a little bit of a metaphor, the roof, the claim, is properly supported by the walls, but that doesn't really matter if those walls aren't properly seated into the foundation. So to kind of go over that foundation, we're going to look at types of evidence here. I actually went through and I annotated the whole thing, and I came up with these stats that you see on the screen here. So we've got 33 counts of ethos, 53 counts of logos, and 55 counts of pathos, which surprised me because, like I said, it uses almost all ethos. Well, when I was going back through and reading it the second time, or annotating it the second time, I read it way more than that, as I hope you all did. But I realized a lot of that logos number was embedded within the ethos. So I kind of decided, well, this isn't really a good representation of what is actually being used here, because a lot of this logos isn't their own. It's what I like to call borrowed logic again. So I made this second graph here. First graph. This is just kind of a graph of that first set of data. So we've got kind of our ethos up here, our logos in this corner, and our pathos over here. And you can see, strangely enough, contrary to what I'm claiming here, it looks fairly balanced. You think that's a well-structured argument, right? Well, if we go to our next slide with our other pie chart, we can see we've split our logos here into our original logos and our borrowed logos. Now, our borrowed logos, I don't know if you can see the small text in the back of the room there, but the borrowed logos makes up almost 15% of the stuff that they used in this article. What is it? Rhetorical analysis. And ethos, we can still kind of see our 23 and some percent over here. But 15% is a fairly large chunk of that, if we can go back, of that 37% that we saw before. So we can come forward. That takes what they actually added to what's happening here down to like 20% of the article is actually them drawing conclusions, them actually putting forth new perspectives or anything like that. So, with that 23% ethos and that 15% borrowed logos, that puts us, almost like kind of close to 50% already. That's what, 45%, I think, is not actually their work. There was actually there was one page where the entire thing was a quote. It was just 4 straight paragraphs of direct quote from their kind of expert source. And there was just nothing new in there. They were just parroting back what he was saying. And then, okay, the last thing here is to address all this pathos. I'm claiming it's mostly ethos, right? But we're only seeing 45% so far, right? Well, the way I was counting them, I was looking at individual counts of these things popping up. So, anytime I saw anything that alluded to pathos, I would circle it. Anytime I saw anything that alluded to ethos, I would circle it. Same for logos. The thing with ethos and logos is that it takes a lot more to get a point across using those rhetorical devices. So in pathos, you can use a single word here, a phrase here, like 2 or 3 words. The average word count that I was circling for pathos was probably maybe like 2.5. Whereas for ethos and logos, I was taking entire paragraphs at a time. I would break them into smaller chunks within that, but still that entire paragraph was only a few points, like 3 to 5, whereas if you had a paragraph full of pathos, you'd have like 3 words here, 2 over there, then there's one really intense word, and you could easily fit like 7 or 8 counts of pathos into one passage at the same length. So kind of after I pulled this data and figured it all out, I realized this whole section of the chart as well really needs to be shrunk, because I pulled data wrong, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you. I'm a logos guy, so I had to pull some data, but I did it wrong. So I unfortunately didn't have time to make another graph for us, but we can just kind of use our imagination and shrink this down a little bit. And that's kind of how we get to our mostly ethos. Again, full-on pages of direct quotes. How many times have your English teachers told you don't do that? So moving on here. So we've got some examples of our different kinds of stuff that I was circling. So first we have our ethos. I cut this one down a lot to make it fit, but the keyword here is Bendant says. There's a lot of those 2 words in this essay. Then for logos, we have first wheeled robots had cameras, then someone added guns to them. The same thing with predator drones. Armed robotics has been a trend line for years, so it's kind of that like taking point A, point B, and continuing it out towards point C. And then pathos, kind of that classic hit you in the gut thing. The future of warfare may involve the metallic patter of 4-legged death across the battlefields, trying to get you scared. So now we can move on to credibility. I do not consider this article to be credible, unfortunately. Usually, I tend to trust Wired, but in this particular article, there wasn't much of Wired to be seen. From my own personal experiences, read about other topics that I am fairly familiar with. I have seen them bring in misinformed experts before. I don't know why I did air quotes. They were definitely experts, but they're human. They're missing information as well. And then just on top of that, several independent auditing organizations rate Wired shockingly low on their reliability standard. For example, Ad Fontes Media, I think that's how that's pronounced, rates them at a 37.13 out of the possible 64. And then some articles have gone as low as 9.33. That's out of 64. Not out of 10. That's out of 64. So Wired themselves are a little bit questionable, unfortunately. And then when it comes to their expert source, his name is Samuel Bendant, they made a fundamental flaw when back in the selection process. When talking about the ethics of the development of war machines, they contacted someone who is deeply and personally entrenched in both the U.S. government and the military itself. So naturally, they're going to be fairly biased towards trying to get these things out there. The article openly admits that Bendant is a analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses, also referred to as the CNA, and a criminally minimal amount of Googling can confirm that he is a senior fellow at, what was the name of that? The Center for New American Security, or CNAS, and which is an organization dedicated to reevaluating national security with autonomous fighting capabilities, or autonomous fighting elements in at least in mind, if not in the forefront. And then on top of that, his personal research actually focuses on specifically, let's see if I can find, okay. Oh, we didn't bring up okay, yeah. So here's CNC and CNOS. This is a picture of him over here. Where were we? Oh yeah, his particular research, his personal research that he does with CNC is actually on unmanned military systems and artificial intelligence, is the direct quote from his biography website, or biography entry with CNC. So again, the roof can be fairly well supported on the wall, but when there's no foundation, you get quite a bit of bias leaking into that roof. So let's move on to introspection. This is kind of where the meat of the presentation is. Rather oddly, when I was first reading the article, I picked up on the weirdly thin feeling of the justifications rather quickly, but I couldn't initially tell what was the problem. And it was only after I had properly annotated the entire thing twice over that it kind of finally clicked for me, that the sheer quantity of ethos being used was unusual, to say the least. And, you know, being the logos-based person that I am, I'm a logic man. I had to run those numbers. It didn't work out, but it gave us some very, very good insights. So yeah, that's when I had to go run those numbers and kind of figure out what's what. But I think this is kind of almost a cautionary tale of sorts when it comes to listening to your gut. Because when I first found this article, it looked so promising. I was so excited. It had everything I needed. But it ultimately turned out to be wildly unqualified for the discussion at hand, just due to its biases. Particularly in discussions on ethics and morals and belief systems in general, it's very, very easy to kind of appear genuine because of the natural veneer of vulnerability that the subject matter gives you, because it's so close to who we are as people. Oftentimes your moral compass is your identity, essentially. So while the article actually directly contradicts this, I think the nature of its construction can kind of answer the question for us, in that, yes, these are a threat on an ethical level. By removing the human element from warfare, it is so much easier to dehumanize and other the enemy. And ethics are kind of such a base human thing that when your alarm bells start ringing, it's usually time to start listening. So the fact that someone felt that this article needed to be made to kind of slip through the radar and suppress those alarm bells makes me think it's time maybe we started listening to them even more. And at that point, I would either kind of step back, and then later, once everybody has finished their individual sections, we could go up and do connections. We could like pair off, and two people could like have a quick little bit about like, yeah, we saw these parallels in our articles, or right after that, I could go straight into comparing to someone else's. I don't have information on everybody's right now, but just based on mine, what I'm thinking right now for the comparison goes a little something like this. It might steal your thunder, so tell me how you feel about it. But it was knocking around in my head, so I have to say it and get it out there. See what you think. Where was I? So the very fact that someone felt that this article needed to be made to kind of slip through those cracks and kind of suppress those alarm bells kind of makes me think it's time to start listening even more. It actually reminds me a lot of Izzy, your social media posts. She was on social media posts. We'll get to her in a second, but I was kind of thinking about this, and like, she has posts that range the complete spectrum of people who just post their opinion, and it's just stuff that they came up with, to people who are it's just a quote of some guy. Well, we'll get to who it is later, but it's a historical quote, and it's kind of the two extremes, but they both come to the table trying to prove something. And I think that's honestly the bigger question when it comes to ethics that we need to be concerned about, is that everybody comes to the table with their own agenda and their own angle that they're trying to push, but at the same time, everybody's perspective is critical. We need to listen to, we need to at least listen to what they have to say. We don't necessarily need to include all perspectives. There are some pretty bad ones out there, but you know, those two opposite extremes, that's a bad example because it's not ideology, but you know, again, ethics, particularly of weapons, something that can take your life away in a second. It needs to be an issue, and I think it needs to be an issue that people are more aware of, because of articles like this being able to, like, it took me a good 3 days before I figured out what was going on here, and I was looking for it. So, kind of an issue. Anyway, I will step back and I'll let you take over the spotlight for a while now. Yep, no problem. Go for it, man. And scene. What do we got? Holy shit, that's 22 minutes on that section alone. Fuck. I gotta cut that down. Okay, so I can just kind of move quicker, but I think that's the base structure of what I'm doing. Probably didn't help that I was making up a lot of it on the fly because I haven't kind of rehearsed it and gotten it down yet. Man, my throat is dead. Also, yes, that is a complete 180 on the article from literally 5 hours ago, when we realized it didn't fit the assignment. Gosh dang it. I've been talking for a half hour and it doesn't feel good. So yeah, the obvious feedback is time. Gotta cut that down. I think that comes with practice. I gotta run it a couple times. Probably gonna do that after school tomorrow, mostly, because we're gonna be presenting the next day. So the majority of what I'm gonna be doing is practicing for the presentation on Wednesday and trying to pare this down. But the structure is there, so go ham. See ya. And thank you again for doing all the formatting on this. Oh my goodness. Check you later.